Hi again, everyone. Welcome to our series of lightning talks on wildfire and wildfire management technology. Again, my name is John Porton. I'm the Senior Research Manager, the SciCore Division of SDSC, and I am delighted to be joined today by Leticia Lee. Leticia is a computational data scientist at SDSC. She gets to work with me. Her research focuses on developing spatial and temporal models of fuels that help us build really detailed prescribed fire models within the Wi-Fire Labs product, BurnPro3D. Leticia's research background has to do with satellite sensing and building vegetation models from satellite photography. She holds a PhD in earth sciences from Boston University. There is probably no one better in the world to lead us in a discussion about what BurnPro3D does than Leticia. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, John. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about BurnPro3D and yeah, really excited to share with you today.
Great. Well, as I understand it, you have a presentation ready for us. So I will just get out of your way and you can share your screen whenever you'd like.
Perfect. Okay. Can you see that? Okay. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about BurnPro3D. So as John mentioned, it is part of the Wi-Fi lab, and I will discuss a little bit more about BurnPro3D with you. Okay, so the BurnPro3D platform is basically a web platform designed to give users easy access to next generation fire science to plan and implement prescribed burns at scale. So what's really important about this is that, as you may know, prescribed fire is widely being used to sort of control the wildfire disasters that have been going on. So as you know, um, over the last maybe 150 to 200 years, we've had a really long history of suppressing fires, and this is just a buildup of fuel. So sort of to combat this issue, we are working on implementing prescribed burns all over the country and especially in California to try to reduce that fuel load. And why BurnPro3D is necessary and really important is because we're trying to scale the beneficial fire and over large landscapes. And this kind of requires new approaches, tools, and technology, which we at the Wi-Fi are using. So for BurnPro3D, there's sort of three main pillars. So the first one is fast fuels, which is a 3D vegetation fuel model for this 3D fire model. So hence the name BurnPro3D. We also have drip torch, which generates custom ignition patterns for the burns. So basically, how are the burns going to progress over the landscape? And quickfire, which is basically the foundation of BurnPro3D, which is the 3D fire model developed by our colleagues at the Los Alamos National Lab. And this is a prescribed fire simulator that works with three-dimensional fire model, which takes into account weather and atmosphere and sort of like propagates that through the landscape. So for the first one, I'll just talk a little bit more in detail about fast fuels, which is a 3D vegetation and fuel model. So this basically predicts trees, their species and their sizes over the contiguous United States and sort of uses best matched forest inventory and analysis plot data. So this is kind of just a guess at prediction of like what trees are going to be in a specific area that we want. And then it uses species-specific equations to model the canopy structure and sort of the three-dimensional structure of the forests. And then finally, it creates voxels, which is a short for volumetric pixels for the 3D representation of the forest. So in this image here, this is basically a representation image of the voxels of the 3D forest. So you can kind of see it's kind of like Minecrafty. So each cube here represents fuel. So it's kind of showing like what are the fuel in this box and like where there aren't any fuels, there's like nothing. So you can kind of think of it as sort of like Minecraft where we have like all these building blocks and then is an input to the three-dimensional fire model. Okay, so the second one we have is drip torch, which is the custom ignition pattern. So it kind of generates the spatiotemporal ignition patterns, and we kind of take into consideration the boundary of the burn unit. So here, for example, are these images where you can kind of see where the boundary is and sort of where the ignition will occur. Blacklining operations. So blacklining is something that firefighters do to sort of prevent fires from spreading or escaping during controlled burns. So we have this like thicker black line, and that kind of represents the blacklining operations. So in the real like prescribed fire situation, firefighters will initially, but the day before, or maybe like, just prior to the prescribed burn, they'll go out and burn this strip of land. And this will help just reduce the fuel load there. So fire won't be able to like cross as easily into the place that we don't necessarily want to burn. Ignition device configuration. So there's a lot of different techniques in burning. So basically we can have like hand burning, burning from drones or even ATVs. And so we can give these sort of parameters to drip torch and also ignition crew resources. So basically like how many people will be burning and as well as the desired firing techniques. So there's a lot of research and sort of maybe like an art and finesse to like how are we going to burn this particular landscape. So each burn unit will have its particular needs. So for the desired firing techniques, there are many different firing techniques that a burn practitioner could ostensibly use. And we are able to, demonstrate those techniques through the drip torch program. Okay, so the last thing is the quick fire, and this is the prescribed fire simulator. So this is what BurnPro3D is sort of sits upon. So this is kind of the foundation. So quick fire is a 3D fire model that accounts for the atmospheric response and feedback to fire. So in these images here, you can kind of see how it's kind of a three-dimensional model. So the gray part here is like smoke, and then here we can see the wind fields. It's kind of hard to see in 2D in these images, but you can kind of imagine like the wind is like, blowing this way and that way. And as the fire increases, it actually creates its own weather. So this 3D fire model takes into account like what will happen, the fire, how the fire will create its own weather, and how that weather will be spread throughout the landscape. So quickfire also quantifies the impact of the different ignition strategies on the fire intensity and fuel consumption. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, there are many different techniques to doing a prescribed fire, and all those different techniques will give different results. So quickfire is able to quantify the impact of those different strategies. And then in addition to the fire model and how much fuel consumption of the landscape, we can also do smoke and emissions modeling using quickfire for carbon monoxide and PM 2.5. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is what kind of happens in BurnPro3D. So first we have creating the burn ensemble. So basically selecting the burn area. So what area do you want to burn? Generating the fast fuels 3D vegetation model, defining environmental conditions. So we can, in BurnPro3D, we can choose the wind speed that we want. So wind speed, wind direction, the fuel conditions of that day that you are modeling, and then as well as designing the ignition pattern using the drip torch program. And the second thing is that BurnPro3D will, in the background, because we're at the San Diego Supercomputer Center, we have all these supercomputers at our resources. So we'll be running BurnPro3D and running quickfire simulations in the background for all these environmental conditions that the user has selected. And then it can calculate the fine fuel consumption. And then finally, we'll evaluate the burn scenarios. So we can identify the environmental conditions that achieve certain burn objectives that we want to see. For example, we want to burn, a burn unit, but we don't want to kill all the big trees. So basically, we can have that as our objective for the burn. And then we can see how these environmental conditions will achieve that objective. And then we can also explore visualizations of the burns. So I'm going to show that. Okay, let me just, yeah. Okay, so here is BurnPro3D, and this is the three-dimensional vegetation model. I'm sorry if it looks kind of weird on Zoom. I think maybe it's not the best, but hopefully you can kind of see that this is the three-dimensional vegetation inputs that we put into the model. So let me just like kind of zoom in maybe a little bit. Okay. So you can see like the different colors of the trees kind of correspond to different species here. And that's kind of over the landscape. And we can kind of click around and look at the canopy, mid-story, and surface. So if we look at the mid-story, there's a lot less. And then the surface fuel looks like that. And this is just a satellite image. But we can go back to the canopy model and kind of see like how basically kind of a three-dimensional visualization of the fuels in this location. And then this is the outputs for BurnPro3D. So we have surface consumption, mid-story consumption, canopy consumption, and then the burn inputs. So these are our environmental inputs that we're going to be inputting. So for example, find dead fuel moisture, the live fuel moisture, what the wind speed was, and the wind direction. And let's also take a look at a time-lapse video to show you how the burn progresses in Quickfire. So these are kind of time steps of 10 minutes. So it's not like very fluid, I guess, but you can kind of see, well, we're starting here, the burn from the north, and then like continuing on in these lines. And the black just represents where it, like what has burned. So yeah, so that's BurnPro3D in a nutshell.
Outstanding. Thank you so much. I think it's a lucky coincidence that I'm hosting these lightning talks at a time when I'm still somewhat new to the Wi-Fi lab because I see this stuff and I am just awestruck every single time. I don't know what order the viewers have watched these lightning talks in, but I have just finished my interviews with Chris Anthony and Matt Snyder, who are practitioners, and they are so excited about the possibilities of BurnPro3D. They really, really think that this is a total game changer. And I've recorded a handful of lectures now with people who are involved in gathering the data for some of this terrestrial LiDAR, aerial LiDAR, what that means and how we gather that stuff. And I think the amount of detail that goes into building these models and making these pictures that you just showed us, it's so deep. It really is an interesting thing to see. I had one follow-up question real quick, not to put you on the spot. You mentioned this sort of volumetric Minecraft world that you build from this data. This is really at the heart of what we're talking about in these lightning talks, which is how you build a vegetation model and how you create tree lists in these
Mhm.
places. So, without having to get extremely technical, how is it that you build fast fuels? What inputs are you using? What sorts of things have you learned about building a vegetation model?
Yeah, sure. So that's a great question. So the in for users of BurnPro3D, they will just be click. It's basically click for them, and all they do is click, and then Fast Fuels is updated and makes the model for them. But in the background, Fast Fuels does use a lot of different data sources to try to create these tree lists, as you have explained. So the number one thing I think is just the FIA, which is the Forest Inventory and Analysis plot data. So this is basically a program from the US Forest Service where they've gone out and collected information about forests for all different landscapes all over the United States. And then there is another program called Tree Map, which sort of predicts what for every location predicts what is the best match of the plot from the whole long list of plots that the FIA has collected for each location. So, for example, in this location, they think that the vegetation is very similar to plot 107. In another location, maybe they'll think it's more similar to plot 1005. These are just numbers I'm making up, but you can kind of get that not every location has been sampled, but based on, different factors that the US Forest Service has decided, they have kind of matched plots to different locations. So from that, Fast Fuels takes that information and takes the information from the plots and sort of generates what kind of trees will likely be in this location. And that's how we get the fast fuels.
So the view you showed us where all of the trees had their own color,
Mhm.
Fast Fuels is planting those trees by extrapolating from these other data sets and deciding, based on the geography and other things we know about this plot of land, how should these trees essentially be interspersed?
Yeah,
Wow,
exactly.
that's insane. Well, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon to talk with us. The rest of you, I hope that you join us for the remaining set of our lightning talks about wildfire and wildfire management technology. We will see you there.
Bye.